Before I get to today's episode, I want to let you know about episode 300 of Bit Depth, which will be live. On March 19th at 7 p.m., you can watch me squirm amid the barrage of impossible questions that I subject my guests to. Then, you can ask me even more questions, right to my face. Challenge my contradictory beliefs. Ask for my stance on controversial topics. Find out what my favorite Radiohead album is. More details in the description. Theme music. So the thing about my music is that it is anything. Like, I don't have an artist name on purpose, because whenever I first started making music, I was like, oh, let me, write songs. I started just as a singer-songwriter. And then whenever I got an audio interface, it came with Ableton Live, but it was like a light version. Okay. And so it was like the first thing I knew how to like record music into. Okay. And so like one of the first things I did is just like plug my guitar in and like mess with a delay. And it's just like playing with long echoes, like, oh man, this is fun. And so the first track on my first album that's on Spotify is actually like the first thing I ever like put together into a computer.
So like how does that feel that like your baby is quite literally documented? Like that's your baby, that's the infancy.
Yeah. I mean, like that my first album was called Bloom. And that's why, is because it was sort of like these the baby steps, like you're saying, into making music, and not just making music, but like recording music.
Okay.
And so the album itself is just in chronological order as to like when I like started working on these ideas, and you can kind of hear over time how it gets like more complex because I was able to figure out more ideas and put stuff together. Yeah.
Learning how to walk type shit.
Yeah. And then, but it's mostly an ambient album. I play a lot of video games in case like my
I caught the vibe.
Backgrounds.
I caught the vibe, yeah, for sure.
Didn't tell you that, but like so I think the first thing that came out of me was ambient music, just like background stuff that like feels good to just have around. Right. But I was also writing songs, and so the stuff that I have that's currently on Spotify, it's still as Santiago Ramones, but it's all mostly electronic and instrumental music. I'm working on an album right now that is more of a singer-songwriter type thing. But also during my master's degree, I did a anthology series, I guess.
Okay, so, break that down.
That poster there, it says Machinations. I did not do that art. There was a really good artist that did that. But that was like, I was watching a lot of like Black Mirror at the time. Okay. And science fiction is my jam. Okay. And so what Machinations ended up being was this anthology series sort of exploring ideas in science fiction and the future and technology and all of those things. And so I have a rap song in there. and that's just because it's like it came out of me that way, like, oh, let me try something that's electronic, let me try something that's more of like a spoken word thing, and then another thing came out, I was like, oh, this is a rap song. And so
I get to hear that, right? Like hopefully.
Yeah.
I'm into that. I'm here for that. Do you need a feature?
I mean, I'm always open to having anyone in
Santiago,
anything in here.
You might leave with a verse today, That's how quickly I go. So what so the first episode dropped today. I'm sure you've had to listen to it a lot based on editing it and what have you. But what are your thoughts?
I think that you're just like, I'm gonna go like top down, I guess, but here's something that I'm going to say out loud that I haven't said out loud into the podcast yet. But for the month of February, I was intentionally trying to get Black artists on here and just not say anything about it. And since this will be the last like Thursday of February that this one comes out, like, I'm just going to say that out loud. And so I'm trying to give Black voices a platform so that people can hear what you have to say, but not so in your face about it. Not so like, oh, because it's Black History Month, let's like bring out our tokens. Like, it's more about like, if you just look at the feed, it's like, oh, it just so happened to be that all of the artists that were featured in February were Black artists. And so it's really important to hear all of the perspectives. And I think you gave a really awesome story about yourself and, you know, who you are and your journey to getting to where you are. And it's really important for other people to hear that, because the rap game is very like presentation based. You know what I mean? Like, this is the face that we're putting on, and this is the product.
It's very WWE.
Yeah, like you had mentioned. And so the hearing your story as real as it is more important than, you know, making a killer music video or something. Right. Not that a killer music video doesn't help, because it really does, but like knowing who you are, knowing what you've gone through to make the art that you do is more powerful than just like, hey, here's, you know, a killer track or something. Now, I think that like if people listen to that podcast and then listen to your music, they'll go like, damn, there it is. There's all of that. All of that is in there. Right. And that's really awesome. So like, what's your story, Santiago? I don't know that anybody has asked you that. Like, I haven't been able to go back far enough. I don't know if you've addressed it. Yeah. So I would like to know. Right. Well, I mean, this is 296. Okay. Every 100 episodes, I have myself be interviewed. Okay. What is going to happen, and I'm sure you heard the preamble beforehand. Yeah. So it'll be live. This is the first time I'm doing a live podcast. And so I'm pretty excited about that. Right. Evan Jarvix will be interviewing me.
That's a great one. That is a great one. I am a big fan of Jarvix.
I am a huge fan of Jarvix as well. He gets a lot of love on here. Absolutely. Anytime he mentions anyone's name, is like, hey, you should get this person on the podcast, I'm like, phew, like immediately send the message, because I just trust his word.
He's great for the culture. He loves the culture. He loves art, and you can tell through everything that he touches. So shout out to you, Jarvix.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Okay, but yeah, go ahead.
Right. So I don't want to jump the gun and tell my whole story, even though everyone is going to, you know, hear it like here soon on 300. But I guess to give like the Cliff Notes version, I was born in Venezuela. I came to the US in 2001, the day I turned 6. But pretty much was, the technical term is like out of status, but as far as most people's familiarity with immigration system, I grew up undocumented. Okay. And so, yeah, it's one thing to like be a person of color in the United States. It's another thing to be an undocumented person of color in the United States. And so my like paranoia surrounding institutions is immense. And I think I really related to what you had said about like being the black kid in the white school and making sure you know your timetable is better than everyone, making sure you're raising your hand faster than anyone. I felt that as well because I felt like I had to excel, but also not stand out either. Because like, I don't want too many eyes on me. Please don't look into me.
The front
I don't
of the
exist.
middle.
Yeah.
The front of the middle, for sure.
But yeah, and that kind of just led into like who I am. And so I try to do my best and everything that I do. And also another thing that you had said is like, you know, all artists are introverted narcissists, right. and it's like, please love me, but don't look at me. Don't talk to me. Right. So yeah, it's a weird thing. And also like starting this podcast was not really a goal of like, everyone look at me. It was more of, I probably will be telling this story again later, but
save it. The anticipation is great.
Sure.
Save it. You can tell me off air. I want to know off air.
Sure.
But we can save it.
But basically it's about the best conversations I ever have with people are sitting down late night. All of the like masks have come off, and now we can be like, man, life is kind of scary, isn't it? You know, and just like get into the real
like
shit.
Raw human beings.
Yeah. And, you know, the like late night sleepovers or something. And it's like 3 a.m. No one wants to go to bed yet. Right. And it's like, so I like this girl.
Right. Right.
And that's been my favorite interactions with people. And those are the best relationships I've ever gotten with people, is being able to have those super long conversations, and being willing to get into the deep shit rather than, you know, everyone has a podcast nowadays. I got into it, I guess, relatively earlier than everyone else, because I started this in 2016. Okay. I've been listening to podcasts since like 2009. Okay. So
you've always been interested in a conversation.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, I've been in podcasts before anyone even knew what a podcast was in like 2009. It was probably, they first started in like 2006 or something. Right. The name podcast comes from iPod. So it's a broadcast on your iPod.
It's a podcast. Yeah. I never listen. You just blew my fucking top. Okay. Now I'm a little blitzed, but you still blew my top. That's crazy. Podcast. That makes a lot of sense.
Right. Yeah. And so it lets you know how kind of like archaic this medium is. Like radio has been around for a long time, but it's also like this weird niche that has grown because of the internet. And we're able to, you know, you don't have to have a radio tower to like get yourself out there. And that's a beautiful thing about podcasts, but also not everyone should have a podcast. Not everyone has something interesting to say. Sure. And so, and maybe that's not true. I think everyone has something interesting to say, but
no,
maybe
they don't, Santiago. Like they don't. And you've had conversations with them.
Yes. It's more about the willingness to get into it, right? So like...
So you think the intentionality of the conversation is equally as important as the content of the conversation?
Yeah, because if we're trying to like put something significant out here, we're going to try and go into waters that may be a little less charted and maybe go into things that have a bit more meaning embedded into them rather than just my brain went to like sports. Not that sports is necessarily a bad thing, but it's like, it's very direct. You know what I mean? Like points and scores and things are very direct. You can talk about how well someone played a game and it's reflected in the scores and stuff. And it's like, yes, there is something there, but it doesn't, the interesting parts of sports come out of like what it says about humanity and perseverance and all those sorts of things. And those are the things that I'm trying to get to. And so,
and I get that part, but what I'm saying is that you initially said, and sometimes people don't have anything interesting to say, and then you reverted and you went in to say, well, I guess everyone has something interesting to say. And that's where I'm going. The reason I'm saying no, they don't is not to be like a dick. You know what I mean? Like everybody doesn't have sure. There are aspects of life that I step in and add no value. And that's okay. Sure. And there are people that are in that way regarding conversations. Some people talk for the sake of hearing themselves talk, and you can tell. Some people talk when they feel uncomfortable to talk, and you can tell. And it's like you're forcing this narrative when you have nothing to add here, which is okay. You know what I mean? So like, I was just wondering why you felt the need to retract and say...
Yeah. Everybody knows something that you don't.
Okay.
Right. And even if you have had mostly the same experiences, there's at least some nugget of something that they've experienced that you haven't, that you could get something from. And if you seek out those things intentionally, you can find them. And so the kinds of questions that I ask on the podcast are geared towards those bigger ideas that we're trying to move towards that affects everyone. Everyone does have a perspective about what they think happens when we die. Some of those perspectives might be more or less interesting. I do think, and this is, I am not religious. I fell out of Catholicism a long time ago. And so I do find that like people that are very rigidly Christian are very uninteresting in that front, right? Because those things are decided for you.
Is it rigidly Christian or is it rigid in general?
That's a good point, because yeah, I mean, there's lots of people that just like, all right, Bible, that is it. That is everything that I'm supposed to hinge my entire spiritual beliefs on. And that's it. And it's like, if you take all of the experiences that you've had in life, all of the suffering that you've had, all of the joys that you've had, and kind of apply it in and out of the Bible, that can make a very enriching, sort of document. But if you just go like, well, this thing says this, and so I have to. And it's like, yeah, you could be very like legalese about it to where like, I have to believe that there is, this list of things in heaven or hell or this sort of thing because it's been decided for me. But I'm not saying that people who are very Christian are uninterested or uninteresting in those fronts. It's more that it is very easy to lean on the fact that that's there for you and not have to ponder it any further. Because yeah, it's like, well, if the book tells me so, then that's fine. I don't need to worry if, I don't have to make any ethics for myself and just trust that the 10 Commandments are the foundation of my ethics. Not questioning the fact that like the Bible has, God does things in the Bible that also go against the 10 Commandments. And it's like, well, how are we going to look at ethics a little bit more closely in this way? Because this seems to challenge my way of thinking. Sure. And so, like you said, you have questions, sure, right? But it's very easy to just kind of like lean back on the Bible and be like, all right, well, this is what it is. I don't have to worry about it. It's like, well, why not
I think that's
go further?
I think that's a crazy way to just live life in general. You know what I mean? Like, take Bible out and put anything else in. You know what I mean? Yeah, if there's not a ability to exist in nuance, then you're going to, there's no way to live your life that way. I believe that like, I like conversations like this because it helps me like solidify my faith in a lot of ways. And this is what I mean. When we have the ideology that we are to go point by point, rigid layout, the Bible speaks a lot about having to understand what is in there and having to, my people will perish due to a lack of knowledge. And there's these encouraging things that say, go out and seek out, you know what I'm saying, more than what's presented. I feel like the Bible for me has always been a living thing, and I have to live in order to get what is in this living thing.
Yeah.
To have it be so rigid, if it was ever that to me, there's times in my life where I would have felt lost. I don't feel like anything about it is rigid. I feel like as we live life that was lived and kind of shown in that way is what helps us navigate through those things. So I say, I don't only say like to live that way with the Bible. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think it's rigidness. If there's not a fluency of you know what I mean? Everything in this world is vibrations. If you're not fluid enough to be able to navigate through the nuance, then I feel like you're going to miss, what anything has to show you or offer you. What anything in life has to give you, you're going to miss that if you're stuck in that rigid nature. Yeah.
And nuance seems to be dead lately, right? Cancel culture and like the internet does what it does in such a way that we have these doctrines that we have to live by. It's, that same rigidness, but it's now applied to social justice. And it's like, it's good to have social justice, but we need the nuance with it, or else we're going to become fascist in every other regard.
And so what do you think? Like, that's interesting, because you're from a different country, and though you came here, young, I'm sure there's still vivid memories that you have of that place.
It's more like a dream. The memories of Venezuela are just kind of the same way that when you wake up and try and remember a dream.
I see. It takes focus.
Yeah.
So did you what are your thoughts on like racism? Like what is that like for you?
There is nuance, right? There is something I talked to John McMillan about recently is the difference between ignorance and racism, right? And so there are shades to the racism that is in people, right? That like they might have been raised with, or the racism that we even have in ourselves and towards ourselves as people of color. And so, but like ignorance is pretty easily solvable. Like you can just tell someone like what this thing means when you say it to someone else. Is like, hey, the N-word like has a lot of historical context to it, and this is why it would be hurtful to people if you say it in this context, right? And if someone isn't informed, they can very easily just be like, oh no, whatever, like that's bullshit. But like if you just sit down with them like a human being and be like, hey, this affects me personally directly, and this is why it would hurt me and someone else. And like, look, nuance. and ignorance can be solved by just like talking about it. Racism has a far deeper connection to like systems and institutions and culture that is much harder to shake. But we can start with ignorance, and that actually goes a lot of the way. You probably find that like most people who are like racists that are like genuine white supremacists or something don't know any Black people, any Hispanic people, any Asian people. Why is that? The system has that they have sort of put themselves in and like born into and insulated themselves within has forced them to ignore and be blind to any other perspective. And there's I forget his name. I'm bad with names a lot of the times, but this jazz keyboardist, Black man, he would go to white supremacists and yeah, exactly. Teaching. Do you remember his name? I'm blanking on it. Yeah, it's fine. But I mean, and what it takes isn't like, he's not going up and doing speeches. He's not doing that. He's just sitting down with them, talking to them, hearing about their lives, getting to know them. And over time, they're like, these things don't line up. I can't say that these people are inferior to me because I know them, and it doesn't work for me anymore. And that's another level that we can work out of people through human conversation, but then it's the systems that are way harder to change. So, metamodernism is something that everyone's going to be very tired of me bringing up. So I'm just going to keep bringing it up.
I'm not familiar.
Yeah. So metamodernism is the step after postmodernism. So postmodernism was all about like questioning the institutions that we have and being like, hey, this is shitty, or this is bad. This is all the things in the way we are approaching society or whatever it is, pointing all the bad things out. And that's a good thing. But also it doesn't tend to like find solutions very well. Metamodernism looks at everything sort of at a meta level, which is to find the structures and systems that we are interacting within. So the Matrix is postmodernism. It goes, hey, look, the society that we're living in, it's a simulation. It's, you know, it's this box that was made for you, sure, and we need to break out of it. It doesn't necessarily say like what the alternative is. It's more just like free your mind, right. But like, and then what, you know? Which like The Matrix is my favorite film. So like
one of my favorites too. Yeah, for sure.
But like, you know, it is like question the system, and that's cool. That's a good thing. But also, even once you get out of the system, you also still are within another system. In the context of The Matrix, they're, you know, in like Zion, and there's like a whole society, but in the context of like ourselves, if you look at The Matrix as like some people look at it as like a gender allegory or something, because both of the main filmmakers were trans. And so like, oh, if I don't have to live in maleness anymore, I can like break out of the system. It's like, okay, well, if you break out of that system, you still have to live in the system of gender. And so metamodernism sort of looks at things by like, look at the whole thing that we're interacting within, because we can't be outside of systems. And so I think the genius of our generation and coming generations is that we're very quick to look at systems first. And so what used to be, this man is a racist, now becomes, this man has been raised in a racist society and a racist system. And so it's like, it's no wonder that people are racists, is because the system itself makes racists.
But I think that takes some, like, sometimes I think and this is going to be controversial. Sometimes I think that we are evolving ourselves into devastation. Sometimes I think that we think we are far more capable than we are. There is value in delusion. That's how we get Disney World. You know what I'm saying? Like, definitely. There's also destruction in that. And I feel like in a lot of ways we overcomplicate things. I think there's a wisdom in simplicity.
Yeah.
And and it's not to remain a dinosaur or whatever the case may be, like, you know, future forge forward. But like, I really feel like sometimes we just, in trying to create this new, whatever this new thing is, we are almost trading in anything of value that was set before us. And it feels a bit like, fuck what like led us here. All that matters is what's ahead of us.
Sure.
And I don't think I can like subscribe to that all the way. I think that some things that are traditional, or some things that are that were good enough for my moms and my grandmother and I'm not willing to just trade that in because like there's a new wave of, you know what I mean, thinking. And so I find that interesting, like all of these various levels and how we're discussing systems. But I think nothing's wrong with discussing the systems, because there are systems in place that are, you know, set up to like make us fail. I agree with that entirely. However, I feel like in us trying to disseminate these things so much, we're going to think we're better than we are, and we're going to create almost more chaos in trying to do away with any traditions, any things that led us this way. It's almost like we're disregarding all of that to get to this new thing, and I'm not comfortable with that.
So this has kind of become like a thesis of mine in a way, but it is kind of grounded in metamodernism. But it's this idea that complex systems have emergent properties that create tendencies in those systems. That is a very densely worded way of saying that, like, the structures that we have might have things that lead to other things. I usually like explaining this in the example of music, which is, I don't know how up on music theory you are, but that's okay.
I'm not.
The way that our scale is that we use in the Western world, the major scale itself has two half steps between B and C and E and F. It would B, C, E, F. There we go. And just that is the foundation for all of the harmony that we know now. Because our scale has those two places where the distances are different between the notes, creates everything that we know of as to, like, oh, now there's tension, now there's release, now there's tension, now there's release. It's because of those half steps and how we play with them throughout just making music. So it's not that the musical system intentionally put those half steps there, but because they're there, there's all these other side effects that come out of it. Okay. And this happens in all systems. So complex systems have emergent properties that change the tendencies that happen in the system. So when Colorado was one of the first to legalize weed recreationally. A whole lot of the sale of marijuana products popped up in Colorado.
Sure.
So here's the thing, there's a change in the system, and now we get a huge influx of people trying to make this product. This actually exists, like there are entire like areas of law that like live and die based on certain laws changing.
Okay.
And that is because complex systems have emergent properties, and because of this one thing that changes, everything else sort of changes because of it. Okay. So going back to what you were saying about like going into something simpler, the wisdom within the simplicity, we can actually build that into systems. We can build humility into systems. We can build fluidity into systems. But the thing is that I always talk about complexity being, it's just a bunch of small, simple things stacked on top of each other.
Sure.
You can go all the way down into like the atomic level, and it's just like, yep, we have these particles. Whenever you add a proton, it becomes a different thing. Whenever you add another proton, it becomes a different thing. Put those things together, you get cells, you get organs, you get bodies, you get people. People create governments. It's like all these sorts of things. You can break it down into its simplest forms, sure, and you can understand it over time, right? Okay. But we can build certain things from the get-go and go, how can we make this thing more fair, for example? How can we make this system more fluid? How can we make this system more simple?
How do we determine fair?
Right. And so
and like, I guess another question that I have is like, what's the goal? Like what in doing this, like what is the goal? Like what are we trying to accomplish?
Right. And so and that's why everything comes for me back to morality and ethics. In a weird way, this is a philosophy podcast, more specifically, moral philosophy podcast. And okay, I am a moral philosophy nerd, hobbyist, I guess, because I never studied philosophy. Sure. I just get into it because
like,
I like
I'm a true crime junkie. I get you.
Yeah, yeah. And so, yeah, the founding fathers who made the Constitution had certain values and certain core principles that they built into the system, and their biases are still there. And part of what was still there was that these people are inferior, don't have rights, and these people do. And we're still seeing the effects of that today because they wanted to have those biases still there. They knew that like at some point we're going to have to deal with the slavery thing, but it's not our problem yet. And so we're going to.
Do you believe that they knew that? Do you believe that they truly?
I mean, they did, like they wrote about it. They were like, hey, we're, slavery is a problem. The South is too powerful for us to like deal with that right now. And it creates too much money for all of us. And we're all slave owners ourselves. We know it's wrong, but because it's so okay in this time, we're just gonna have to like make the Constitution in this way.
Wow.
But that's the thing. It's like,
I'm going to be Googling the shit out of that. You have created a new obsession.
And so, but they were already building a system on top of a system, which is like the colonies had plantations that lived off of slave labor. Right. And so if you're trying to make a government on the colonies, you can't just get rid of slave labor. Like they're using this right now. You're just like ripping out parts of the machine.
Right.
And so right now we're still dealing with the emergent properties that come from a constitution made by slave owners.
Okay, so I get that. I'm down with that. All of that follows. What is the goal of this like
Metamodernism?
Metamodernism.
Metamodernism is just a way of analyzing systems. For me personally, I think that a like ideal society or even an ideal sort of moral ethical goal is to reduce suffering. That's a good baseline, right?
I'm not mad at that as a baseline. I'm not mad at that as a baseline.
We can't quite eliminate suffering.
But how do we determine suffering? And this is what I'm saying. Because
I have an answer for that.
Okay, go ahead. I'm interested in your answer because like I want to give you an example of like, here's a for instance.
Yeah.
There was a lady in Texas that went and ordered soup. And the soup was placed into a bag and she came and she got it and she walked outside with it. And the soup was so hot that it melted the top of the container. And she went back into the store and she threw the soup that just melted the container in the manager of the restaurant's face. But it's because she thought she was suffering. It was suffering in her. It was, I can't believe like the nerve. She was trying to hurt me when she put this soup in this bag like this. So how do we make a overall determination on if her suffering matters? Because I think her suffering is a part of her privilege to think, how dare you, give me a contain. I think that's what that's about. But she looks at it as suffering.
Does your suffering allow you to bestow suffering upon others?
Does my suffering allow me to bestow suffering upon others?
Do you have the right to make others suffer because you are suffering?
I have the right to react.
Sure. But is it,
for instance,
good?
But is it bad? Because this is what I'm saying. And I know I'm devil's advocating this shit to death, but it's like, if somebody puts their hands on me and in retaliation, I put my hands on them, then in that case, that my suffering did allow me to bestow suffering on someone else. I believe that that's justified too.
Sure.
So yeah, in instances, I believe that is the case. Yeah,
and philosophy has a lot of these thought experiments of just like, how do we approach these sorts of situations? Right. And every situation has like a lot of nuance within it. But another thing is that like the real world isn't a thought experiment. And so in thought experiments, we try and like isolate all of the variables that we can to be like, all right, this is the question and this is the point that we're trying to get across. But the real world is way more complex than that. And it's like, if someone lays their hands on you, it's a little bit more complex than like, I beat their ass back. Right. It might also be like, you're fully trained in jujitsu and you can subdue this person without actually hurting them, but just stopping the suffering on you. Like, and that's something, again, the world is complex. Sure. You may not be trained in jujitsu.
I am not. I have whooped plenty of ass, but I am not trained in jujitsu.
Right. But there are certain ways of using your body to simply neutralize a person without harming them. And so it's not that like, oh, because you have given me this negative, I'm going to give you a negative. It could just be,
so you're talking about grace right now.
Negative. Yeah. Because you gave me this negative, I'm going to bring us to zero.
Wow. We talking about grace. Okay.
And it's hard, right?
Yes. Yes.
It's really hard to say like this is such a weird thing that like I don't know why so many people believe this thing, but it's like because I suffered, you have to suffer too. And it's like because I had to pay student loans and I finally like paid them off, why should you get your student loans forgiven? Because it sucks. It sucked for you. It doesn't have to suck for anyone else. Right. Just let's not make it suck. And
let's universally not make it suck.
Yeah. Okay. And it's like just because it sucked for you doesn't mean, it. And I always, turn this into the ridiculous because it always highlights how ridiculous those things are. It's like imagine Frederick Douglass, who bought himself out of slavery. And then let's say, oh, look, emancipation. Imagine Frederick Douglass being like, man, all these slaves going free. I worked my ass off to like not be a slave anymore. And now you guys are just walking free. How dare you? Like, no, it's just a good thing that there is less suffering. And so going to a thing about like what suffering is, or like how do we determine what a reduction of suffering is? Imagine the worst imaginable pain.
Sure. Constant,
forever, at all times, like the worst.
Right.
It's an imaginable position to be in. And it's also imaginable for anyone, right? Anyone can, just be in 1,000-degree oven or something and somehow still be alive. And we can objectively determine that like this is suffering. Right. Anything that gets farther away from that is good. And so there's actually a Sam Harris talking point, which is just the moral landscape. It doesn't mean that like, there is one really, really bad 100% suffering for everyone. Everyone has their own form of that, but everyone also knows what it's like to get away from that.
Sure.
And that's kind of what he refers to as like the moral landscape. The further away from suffering that we get, the better it is for the subjective experiencer. But like we can make the moral landscape to where everyone is farther away from the worst imaginable suffering.
So how does that materialize like in the real world? So is it no student loans or no student loan debt and like free universal health care?
Right. I mean, there's
stuff like that. Is this idea of basically getting away or further away from what could be considered suffering?
Yeah, exactly. And we can look at those things like the universal health care would do a great deal to reduce suffering for everyone. There's thousands, hundreds of thousands of people just buried under medical debt. And if we could just do away with that, there would be so much less suffering in the world. And we have the means of doing it. We're just, for some reason, not doing it. And so, and this is a metamodernist analysis of like, we're looking at the system as a whole, what things in it are good and bad, what things are happening within the system, and what ways can we not only interact or think outside of the system, but also think within the system.
In your opinion, are there necessary systems?
There are systems that we live in.
But you don't think they're a necessity? Like I'm saying, is there any system that you've observed where you're like, yeah, we need that?
I don't know. So there's a difference between idealism and pragmatism. And so there is, an ideal, which, I guess if we go from like the worst imaginable suffering all the way up to just like pure bliss at all times, heaven, there is an ideal, but pragmatically, probably not going to get there exactly the way that, that ideal is. And so there needs to be a level of sanity about or pragmatism about how we make things better in the world. And so full-on tanky communists believe that like communism is the way, and we're going to have to do many beheadings, and we have to have a gulag to send people to in order to achieve the ideal goal of communism. If you are against communism, you're going to the gulag. And it's like, because they have this ideal, they're willing to cause a great deal of suffering in the meantime. And it's like, right now, we do have money, and we do have private property, and we do have all of these things, the system, the water that we're swimming in. It's not very pragmatic to just like do away with all of that right now, because it takes a lot of work and energy and time to like make that happen. So instead, let's do what we can pragmatically and improve things as well as we can, rather than, being like, well, because it's not perfect, I don't want it. And that's something that like, we can look at Congress all the time, and that's what happens, and all the time, or even just like at restaurants or something. Like, if it's not perfect, I don't want it. It's like, but it's really good. So like, if we could have capitalism as it exists now, with all of its systemic racism, with all of its ways in which it punishes the poor, or we could have capitalism where there's universal healthcare, and it's not perfect. It hasn't solved everything,
right? But it solves something.
We made things slightly better, and we can do. So the
idea
things.
is just so I guess the idea, or the oversimplification of this is it's just a way to try to make the world as universally better as possible. For me, yeah, that's kind of my perspective. Okay. Yeah. What are your views on weed? Like, what do you think about weed?
I think it's not hurtful. So, it's just like, what the fuck should we? Why should we even? But that's the thing. It's like, you could take this to its like furthest extreme and go like, why are any drugs illegal or legal or something? And but then it's like, yeah, we've seen what crack cocaine does to people. We've seen what heroin does to people. And so should that be legal? It's like, well, why don't we structure a system in which heroin does less harm?
And this is happening in South America. So I am familiar with like this ideology where like drugs are legal, and there are also clinics that you can safely go do your drugs in the event that you OD. There are medical professionals there. They'll make sure you get right back where you need to be, and you go about your business. And oftentimes in some of these places, the numbers of drug use go down as a result of that. So I'm kind of on board with like drugs being like legal, because if you could do it in a way where people aren't, I feel like it not being legal is what leads to a bunch of crime. Yeah, exactly. You know what I'm saying? Like, I have to go fuck shit up to get this high. You know what I mean? So if that means I got to steal from my mama, if that means I got to, whatever, I got to get this high. If it is legalized, then you're given an opportunity to like, do you really want to be a crackhead? Like, there's other shit to do. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Complex systems have emergent properties, don't they? And so we, because certain things are illegal, then we get cartels. And so, this is hard to get, but there's a whole organized crime syndicate that is able to get you this thing. And it's like, if if you can just get it.
Like if you go to Walmart and get a pack of heroin, you know what I mean? Yeah.
And there are instances, it was like, if you're a truck driver.
You can't sell a pack of heroin. That's crazy.
But if you're a truck driver and you have to get from San Diego to New York City in the shortest amount of time possible, you could do like some heroin, and
fall asleep on the fucking road, Santiago.
A powerful tool to achieve that.
Heroin? I have never seen a nigga with energy on heroin.
Oh, not heroin.
Cocaine.
Cocaine.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I know what you mean. Yeah, I'm with that. Do you partake in weed?
I myself don't. I'm accidentally straight edge.
Accidentally straight edge. Let's talk about that. What does that mean?
It means that whenever I was growing up, it started up with just like, the fear of God. Like if you do drugs,
he's going to get you, Santiago.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Like you're bad people do drugs and you don't do drugs. And so that just kind of like stayed in me. But it was that with like alcohol. It was that with weed. It was that with cigarettes. And so like my dad used to smoke. I know people who have alcoholic parents, all these sorts of things. And so for me, I was like, I don't need it. Okay. And I just kind of stayed with that for the longest time. Yeah. And so it's just like, I've never been drunk. I've never been high. And it's not like a thing of not wanting to, or like a shame thing, but like, please, if you want to get high, like I think probably everyone should do LSD at some point in their life.
Even you.
Yeah. And I probably will.
Wow. we go from stone sober to LSD. That's interesting.
But that's the thing. It's like, what is it for? Right?
What is it for?
And so people like to drink to loosen up a little bit, right? And that's not a bad thing, right? But if you drink to excess, you're gonna black out and do some things that not so much that you regret, because you're not going to remember, but the people around you are very much going to remember, and they're going to hold that against you.
Sure.
But if you want to loosen up, like, the dose makes the poison, right? So like for myself personally, if I need to loosen up, I can do that to myself. It's just like a level of mindfulness and self-control to like, all right, I'm putting on a show today. Let me like, shake myself out, maybe like treat my set list as a like drug thing. And it's like, if I start with a song that's like super hype, I'm going to be pretty loosened up for the rest of the gig. And I don't have to necessarily like take a drink. Yeah. And so it's like, oh, I do this song first. And in order to perform this song, I have to get to this point. And if I'm not at that point, I'm not doing the song. And so I can do that to myself if I have to. But not everyone needs to structure their lives around that. And if you just want to like take a drink to loosen up, like that's way easier than like trying to like get into the mental space of doing that to yourself.
After all the years of training.
Right. Sure. I mean, I don't know if it's training, but it's, I know myself well enough to know that I can do that. And so same with weed. It opens you up. You're able to like see things from a different perspective. And it's like, man, I have high conversations all the time. And I don't have to have weed for that. But like, if you want to have a high conversation, I'll have a high conversation. Like,
what is a high conversation?
I don't know, like both, analyzing the structures of everything and be like, whoa, man, this shit's huge. And also, have you ever noticed that like triangles, fucking magical, man?
Magical triangle.
And I mean, like, I'll go there with you, you know, like, and when you're high, you're more open to those things, right? But like, you can do that anyway. It's just that we're not comfortable doing that all the time. We're not, you know, willing to put ourselves there, and sometimes we need help to get there. But there are certain things that like psychedelics do that our own brains can't. I can't put myself in an LSD state. That's not something I have the mental fortitude to like summon in my brain, you know? And so, yeah, some things you do probably have to like take a heroic dose of LSD and like go down that trip. But there's a point, right? Like, you don't just do it willy-nilly. You do it to have a like significant spiritual experience. And everyone that I know that has done LSDs has been like, wow, that was like a really significant experience. But I think this was Ram Dass who said it. When you get the message, you hang up the phone. You don't have to keep going back to it if you got the message. Wow, this is a really profound spiritual experience. Thanks for showing me that like my relationship with my dad has caused a level of other problems in the rest of my life. You don't need to go back to it to like relearn that thing. You already learned that thing.
Wow. What a way to look at drug use. Wow, that's interesting. That is interesting. What do you got? I've been interviewing you. What do you got for me? Yeah,
well, I mean, I guess on that, like, why smoke weed?
So I am clinically depressed. And I had to go to counseling. And I am grateful for my wife because she is very about talking and communicating and like getting into your feelings and like normalizing therapy. And for a long time, I'm dealing with all of this shit, and I'm like feeling like I'm on this treadmill of negativity, and it's just like really kicking my ass, and it's like telling me all the worst things about myself. And every lap that I take around this shit, it gets worse and it gets worse and it gets worse. And that was really like bogging down on me around like 20, 25, 26 years old. I remember as a child, I would go home and I would tell my mom I'm stressed. She'd be like, "What's wrong with you?" Like, I just sit in my room, you know, not nothing. And I just say I'm stressed. I didn't know how to articulate I'm depressed. Mm-hmm. So my wife was like seeing me in this way, and she was like, "Yo, you need to go to counseling." And I'm like, niggas don't go to counseling. And so we had a whole back and forth about that. And she convinced me to go. And I went. And my therapist put down a box of tissue next to me. And I'm like, the fuck you doing that for? Thugs don't cry, right? And so I'm there, and like 30 minutes later, like ugly snot cried. And I'm starting to like reveal all this shit. And she's talking to me a lot about like ways to help me cope and so on and so forth. And I had picked up smoking a little bit more at this time. And I noticed that it would really like, I would still have highs and lows, but my lows wouldn't be as low and my highs wouldn't be as high. And it helped me in that way. I enjoy it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't want to like, have a false presentation here, but, a large part of me doing it is medicinal. Yeah. In high pressure situations, you know what I mean? I can't journal all of my shit away. You know what I mean? There are times where I don't have the words. I'm good with my words in so many ways, and except for when it comes to having to on the spot dig up that raw shit in me. I don't know how to access that always.
Yeah.
And so it helps me in that way. It helps me stay on a steady balance.
Yeah.
I recognize that it is not for everyone. That's why I don't push it on anyone. I am not going to be responsible for your vices. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can have those on your own. But it does help me, and I can understand when I have conversations with some of my homies. We talk about deep shit. I'm here with my guy Skanes. We talk about deep shit, real life shit. And we've talked about the effect that that's had on him, helping him in that way. Yeah. You know what I mean? So, yeah, that's why I fuck with it.
Yeah.
And everything tastes delicious. Like, let's not get that fucked up. And I am a foodie. So, like, you know, chicken wings when you're high, amazing.
Right.
Better than chicken wings when you're not.
Yeah. And so everything has an effect. Like, so and that's why I sort of have the perspective of like drugs as tools and kind of everything else around it. So, I mean, yeah, if you have a headache, like take some Tylenol and it'll help. But like, you could also take some morphine that is excessive, but like it'll do the trick too.
That's a large jump.
Right. But like,
it will do the trick though. You won't feel shit.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's like, are you trying to hammer a nail or are you trying to punch a hole in the wall? So like, and so each thing has its use. And so, yeah, and I think everyone should approach their recreational drug use in that way of being informed as to why they're doing it. Instead of like, you know, kind of being peer pressured into it, which is how a lot of people do it. Like, yeah, you do sort of feel like pressured if everyone in the room is like passing it around. It's like, all right, sure, let's go. But like, do you need to be there? Do you need that? And like, you can just hang out.
Right.
And you don't have to be high with everyone. Right. You can just hang out and it's like, oh no, I'm good.
Right.
And, you know, let's normalize
that part too.
Saying no. Like, and it's like, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to hang out? You just hang out. You don't have to be high with everyone.
You didn't show up to get high tonight.
Yeah. If you didn't want to be high, if it doesn't hit you the same way it hits other people, like, you know yourself well enough. And it's like, what do I want out of this? Sure. Let me just hang out. I don't need to be high. Sure. And I think that this is a thing that I'm going to get into that is kind of heavy, but and of course I'm bringing it up late into the podcast.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's get it.
I don't believe in free will. And so
wait. you don't believe that it exists, or you don't believe in it? Like,
the notion of free will is an illusion. That is the way by which I have absorbed the universe, and this is a result that has come out.
Free will is an illusion.
Yes.
All right.
And that's just my perspective.
I'm buckled in. I'm ready for this. So yeah, I want to know what that's like.
And regardless of if you believe in free will or not, it would be better to structure systems as though free will didn't exist.
So you believe that people doing things based on their own accord is an illusion. Mm-hmm. Because that's what free will is. Mm-hmm. And so you believe that there should be systems in place as if they didn't have the opportunity to operate on their own. So this is starting to sound real cultish.
Sure. Okay. So you flipped my words a little bit there.
And I don't mean to. Please correct me, because I do not mean to.
We should structure systems as though as though people didn't have free will. So what that is I'm going even farther into this whole, what is the purpose of punishment?
To correct behavior.
What
or
behavior?
I shouldn't say punishment. I should say discipline. So punishment. Punishment is a consequence to your action. If you willy-nilly shoot somebody in the street and they go put you in a cage, your punishment is a result of your action. It is a consequence of your action.
Why would someone willy-nilly shoot someone?
There could be several answers to that.
Yeah.
Mental illness could be one. Attempting to fit in, feeling as though there were no other options. There are various answers to that question.
Are there things that we can do as a society to prevent those things that lead to that?
Not absolutely. I think there are ways to ease it. And so like the concept of easing something, I believe we are capable of doing. The concept of eradicating entirely or absolutely, I don't think that's possible.
But like, yeah, so if someone just shoots someone, there's a reason for that. So we should look at the system in a way that instead of this person is a bad person and they made this decision, we should go, this person made a decision based on previous experience, based on previous, like their own life, and things led up to that.
Sure, but that doesn't change the result or the impact that it has on others. And I feel like that could potentially dead accountability. Sometimes you have to just kind of sit in the fact that, okay, so I'm gonna go here. You asked me this question and I did not ask it to you. So do you believe that there are like good and bad? Like, I don't know if you asked it like that. How did you ask it?
Is there such a thing? Do you believe humans are evil by nature? That's the question.
Do you believe humans are evil by nature?
No, blank slate. And we are like, humans are biology and environment. And that's basically it. We like, our behavior is shaped by the like stuff that our brain does and the stuff that our brain has observed around us. So it's actually like proven if you keep a baby in a dark room without any light, it will be blind. So its environment did not give its eyes stimulation. So the body decided, I don't need these. It actually goes even further. There's this thing called failure to thrive. And a baby will straight up just die if it doesn't receive human contact. The body just goes, well, I'm not going to live, so I'm out. So like that's ways in which like biology shaped by environment, but also what is around us. If you are raised in a Catholic household, like I was, you wouldn't have Buddhist beliefs. That wasn't in there. That wasn't put into the recipe of that upbringing. So you can't just bring that out of nothing. So the Catholic beliefs come out of a Catholic household.
Okay.
And that is a result of the environment that that person grew up in. Sure. If you don't know that something is an option, you can't make that decision.
And I get that. I'm with all of that shit. What I'm saying though is like, I think that yes, a lot of it has to do with your biology and your environment for sure. But I look at like a Ted Bundy. No abuse, none of that shit. You know what I'm saying? Like a little scandal, like, you know what I'm saying? Like his Mama was his sister, you know. But that ain't crazy. That ain't, you know, start hitting women over the head and dragging them into your car crazy. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So if there isn't evil by nature, how does that happen?
Yeah. So I'm not a Ted Bundy expert, but you might be. When did this happen? When was Ted Bundy doing his thing?
60s.
Okay. What was happening in the 60s?
Vietnam, civil rights movement.
So was America in the 60s a nice place to be? Was everyone kind to each other? Was everyone loving? Or was there
America's never been that.
Exactly.
So, okay.
And so just because he wasn't abused or anything doesn't mean that just came out of nowhere. Like there are things around us that like show us things about the world. And the equation of Ted Bundy was like, you get these exact ingredients and you get Ted Bundy. And like, it could have only happened in like that time and place and person because of these variables.
And that's why you believe that there is no free will, because everything that we do is contingent on variables that were predetermined.
That doesn't mean that everything that we do is meaningless, but it just means that we have our reasons.
Right, but I feel like sometimes those reasons is because I felt like it. And like, it's hard for me to think like there has to be a system that like, that is something I am going to be thinking about ad nauseum, because like free will isn't like, I believe in free will. I believe that like sometimes people do shit because they feel like it. I believe that like, I believe that sometimes like there is just evil. I think it's hard for me. I understand that like Hitler was raised, you know what I'm saying, biracial, and it was a hard upbringing, and everything he tried to succeed at, whether it was being in military service or being an artist, he really didn't get revered like that. That does not justify
It doesn't.
The Holocaust,
It
right?
doesn't.
And I believe that it wasn't just the systems, it was his evil ass. It was your evil ass that did not know how to. It was the evil that allowed him to make the decisions that he made. I believe that.
Sure, but there was also so many other steps in the process that other people could have gotten involved, that other people could have been like, you know, hey, maybe don't put people in camps. But instead, people followed orders.
Right, but like, how does that like eliminate free will? You understand what I'm saying? Like, that's what I'm grappling with right now.
Sure.
How does that eliminate free will? How does people have free will at that point in time to say, hey, yeah, don't do that? You know what I'm saying? You probably shouldn't. Like, they didn't even succeed the first go round. Like the Nazi party had to go a couple times.
But if you dig all the way down into every decision that you make or that I make, you could say that it was just like, I felt like it, but there's more. There's more going on in your brain. And just because you can't explain it doesn't mean that it wasn't influenced by something. We pick up so much, like our bodies are picking up so much that we don't consciously know about. Like, I can, if I'm thinking about it right now, I can hear the ambient noise of this room. There's the like whine of my laptop. There's like a low hum that's like the AC. There's I can hear whenever like a temperature change happens and something like pops in the room.
Okay.
We're not consciously thinking about those things at all times.
Right.
But we can make decisions based upon those influences, not necessarily those that I just listed, but there are lots of influences around us that like, I work from home and I sit in this chair at my computer for a long time. There were days where there was like a neighbor or something and they had their truck outside with just like a low rumble. And it was just like the right frequency that just made me uncomfortable. And like, I just had to like stand up and like walk around and like take a breath because I was just uncomfortable.
Okay.
And it took me a while to like realize that it was this just low frequency that was fucking me up.
Right.
And it's like, why did I get up and like take a breath? And it's like, oh, because there's just something hitting me that is making me uncomfortable right now. And I need to like do something to get me away from that. We're not always like conscious of those things in our lives, but you know,
there's always something that
the
makes
dominoes keep falling.
That's interesting. I'm a sit with that one because like I'm a pretty insightful person, you know what I'm saying? And sometimes I just be doing shit, you know what I mean? Like straight up, like no, sometimes I just be doing shit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that like, I see what you mean. I feel like if you could analyze anything like that though, like if you pay enough attention to anything, you could break it down like that. But that's interesting. I am going to be thinking about the concept of free will for sure.
There's one last thing on that. There's this book called The Righteous Mind, and there's he is a like social psychologist or something like that. But basically he arrived at a general conclusion that is people make emotional decisions and then rationalize them with logic after the fact. And so even if it might be like, oh, I totally did this because blah, 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 and you can think of an explanation. What his studies came to find is that like a lot of times people gave really bullshit answers to try and like logic out the thing that they did just then. But it's like, we kind of just make stupid decisions sometimes. And it's really just because we're animals and we make emotional decisions, but also we have a brain. And so we're like, oh no, I'm a reasonable person. This is why I did it.
Wow.
And so we like try and think of reasons as to like why we did a thing. And it's like, we may not even always know why we did a thing, but we're also just animals. And so, and so like, I mean, you're a man. How have you ever just made a just dick decision that just like after the fact, you're like, that was pretty fucked up what I just did.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
And it's like, I don't know why my brain compelled me to this, but like the post-nut clarity has allowed me to see that like,
sure,
that was fucked
You could
up.
Talk plainly in front of my wife.
Yeah.
I know what you're saying. She knows what you're saying. We're going to talk about it in the car.
Yeah.
But yeah, for sure. But like, anyway, next question I have, Santiago, are you and your wife going to have children?
No. And I am not at liberty to talk about things regarding my wife's body without her consent.
And that's the last question I have about that. I'm not even going to go there. I've been married long enough to know what that means. Well, that's what's up.
Yeah.
So the podcast is your baby.
Yeah.
And making music is your baby.
Yeah.
I love it.
And I have, like a lot of emotions and things put into this thing. So, yeah, I feel pretty good about it. If a real baby eventually happens, I'm down with that too. Okay. But like, music is a lot of work, isn't it?
It is. It is. Are you, if hypothetical baby, would you raise it with the idea that this is just an animal too? Or would it be different than that? Because when I hear you say humans are just animals, I get it. I get what you mean. But I don't see that in my like, it's hard for me to go, I have 4 animals.
Yeah. Spirituality is important, right? I'm not religious, but I'm very spiritual. And that phrase has been maligned over time, but like, it is verifiably true that like we are all connected in some way. You can say that metaphorically, or you can say that literally, scientifically, and it still is the same thing. So, I mean, just because you are an animal doesn't mean that we aren't connected to each other. It doesn't mean that it isn't nice to receive a hug or give a hug. So life still exists, and there are things to enjoy and things to experience. And just because we are animals doesn't mean that, you know, the chocolate doesn't taste good if you can break it down to all of its smaller details and analyze why its complexities do this thing in your brain and all this sort of stuff. But also, it's nice. And that's true too.
I fuck with that, man. I fuck with that.
Thank you so much for doing this with me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was fun.
Where can people find you and your things?
I am everywhere at I am Thomas Who. Thomas Who ? On all your DSPs. And stream my shit. I make dope shit.
Yeah, it is dope shit. I guess my outro then.
Yes.
I'm Santiago Ramones.
I am Thomas Who. Here is Whole Ass King featuring Savion, Bones Flow, and Takis, produced by the legendary Sundeep. Yeah. Okay, the fat nigga back at it. Bit slimmer, same picture, take a crack at it. That era, my image, I'm a cipher all the sore rides. Loud city floor side, cleanest nigga spitting, peep the fluoride. I just left a meeting with a nigga worth $1 million. He said it ain't your business if you can't afford to build it. I told him I could dig it, then I practiced my resilience. Cause they only love a beast that they can tame before they kill it. And I'm far beyond the average animal. Caught a lick, handle dope, bottle rockets popping, my lingo forget the can of smoke. First 35 talking about why bother. Put my eyes on the prize, now I'm walking on water.
$1 million credit, we just getting started. Wealth started with the health, I became a target. Tell that little bitch I'm a whole ass king. Tell that little bitch I'm a whole ass king. Pull up as I am, body full of jams. Pocket full of shit, I guess I owe to Uncle Sam. Tell that little bitch I'm a whole ass king. Tell that little bitch I'm a whole ass king.
See them try to jump ship till they notice that I'm on land. You can have 100,000, bitch, you still won't be the man. Niggas switching up for fun, I don't think it's a part the plan. You gotta see what cards is dealt before you can lend a hand. Ain't no later handle shit right where you stand and be the man. Stick to the plan, the definition of a stand, yeah. I'm cool on how they keep it heated, so I ain't needing fans. I pursue it like a loss, even if a nigga win. Good things still got the end. You should know when you begin. How I bottled up the fake just so I can find the sin. It's the shit I ask myself, my nigga, time and time again. Wonder how they got me measured. Ain't nobody gave an inch, motherfucker.
$1 million credit, we just getting started. Wealth started with the health, I became a target. Tell that little bitch I'm a whole ass king. Tell that little bitch I'm a whole ass king. Pull up as I am, body full of jams. Pocket full of shit, I guess I owe to Uncle Sam. Tell that little bitch I'm a whole ass king. Tell that little bitch I'm a whole ass king.
Let me bubble in the bag a minute. Thomas Echo tag a minute. Universe my playground. Who the fuck told you the sky's the limit? Think I ruled the world, but I ain't push no Q45 infinite. Probably slither through it, some juice it with a vibe infinite. Word the OG Q-tip, that little baby is a vibrant thing. Shit, now these rappers out in A, they full of fiber, man. Straight jackets and bars, some Chienta and some fiber beans with a new juice and some screw loose. If you really wanna learn what the drama mean, Oklahoma gon' swing that plane. But if you rain, then we gon' bang and we gon' bang and sweep your block to the fat one saying, got your crown, I got my crown. We should get it profit, man. Salute to the troops in both our groups and then move forward as cash.
We just getting started. Well started with the health, I became a target. Tell that little bitch I'm a whole ass king. Tell that little bitch I'm a whole ass king. Pull up as I am, body full of jams. Pocket full of shit, I guess I owe to Uncle Sam. Tell that little bitch I'm a whole ass king. Tell that little bitch I'm a whole ass king.
Yeah. See, I'm a motherfucking king, you know what I'm saying? K-I-N-G, kind, ignorant, but never ghost, you know what I'm saying? We gonna roll out the red carpet in the hood when you see me, baby, you know what I'm saying? That's what it is. And if the police kind of run up on me, tell them pop, never stop, you know what I'm saying? It's whatever. K-I-N-G, baby. Y'all niggas is whack.
You can find everything that I do on my website, SantiagoRamones.com. I make music and produce audio. The music that you're hearing now is music I made. You can listen to official releases by Santiago Ramones on Spotify, Apple Music, and the other streaming places. Or you can support me directly by buying my music on Bandcamp. I'm working on Hypothetical, my first singer-songwriter album. So if you'd like to hear that at some point, there are lots of ways to support me on my website. There's a Discord server in which we discuss deep topics from the podcast, but it's also a community of beautiful human beings. All the links to my things are on my website, SantiagoRamones.com. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast. It would mean a lot to me to hear what you have to say, and it lets others know what to expect, better than I could ever explain. I want to help the world have deeper conversations, so thank you for listening to and supporting Bit Depth. I always end the podcast with my 3 things. They shape my life philosophy. Those 3 things are: love never fails, it's going to be okay, I might be wrong.